La Seine, the river flowing through Paris, a metaphor of passage, of transit, of change from one state to another. Now, a passage is often what we think of when we think of migration, passing borders, crossing boundaries. But are we sure that migration policy and migration law regulates the position of bodies in space rather than how far in time individuals stand from certain institutional structures within a given jurisdiction? So I suspect that it isn't movement, the physical change of place, that keeps people away from institutional structures. And in the contemporary debate, we seem to be afflicted by a pensée unique, according to which migration would be a movement across borders. We talk about boundaries and borderlands, liminal spaces, frontiers, front lines, streams, channels, flows, fluxes. This obsession about space obfuscates that jurisdictions determine who counts as a migrant, when, where this is the case, but jurisdictions are not locations in space. So I think we should reconsider our assumptions. And the passage of the river is also about the passing of time, pantarei, everything flows. And we owe it to the continental philosophical tradition, reflecting on the other, that as humans, we are all, always, and only in transit. So we cannot escape transience, and as human beings, we're all merely passing by. This is the existential baseline from which any philosophy of migration mustn't, depart. The idea of a passage of one state to the next in time also is suggested by a number of intermediate positions that a person may have between being an absolute stranger and being a full citizen. The law is the central tool we use to regulate the passage from one status to another in a flow that is delimited by time, by the life of somebody whose time law regulates. So I work towards a theory of migration, and I suspect that migration law isn't so much about studying the fluxes, but the friction. So friction being the force resisting the relative motion of solid surfaces, fluid layers, materials sliding one against the other. Migration law creates friction in a world of fluxes. So from my perspective, it's not the flows that are in need of first explanation, but the friction and the infrastructure that allows it and impedes it, the constraining affordances of the law. So we're here today to discuss a little bit about law and magic, or the magic in the law. And my name is Patricia Mindus. I'm professor of practical philosophy at Uppsala University, and I have the pleasure of being a FIAS fellow here at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Paris. And with me today, I have Professor Pierre Brunet, who's full professor in public law at the Sorbonne Law School here at the University of Paris I.
The project that brings you to the IEA concerns migration and the law. The phenomenon of migration is at the heart of many current debates, both political and scientific. This project to rethink the theory of migration, one that will contribute to these debates, which ones, and how, in what terms?
Yeah, so I would like to develop a theory of migration that has a philosophical angle. And the reason why I would want to do this is that the theories of migration we currently work with are underdeveloped from the point of view of asking what kind of phenomena is migration, right? So I would like a theory of migration that kind of takes seriously the fact that law is the technique we use in order to determine who is a migrant, when that is so, for how long that is so, and what it takes for this to change. So I think that taking social ontology, which is a branch of contemporary analytical metaphysics, taking it seriously and bringing that to migration study can be valuable for a number of reasons, right? So for migration studies, I think it's going to be important because it will enable us to have a critical discussion on the conceptual apparatus that is being employed in this multidisciplinary area that has been booming over the last decades. But I also think it's important for law, in particular for migration law, because it would enable us to think through in a more careful way the object of our inquiries. Also, I think that it might matter for a number of other discussions, namely discussions held in political theory, such as in democratic theory, the discussion over the boundary problem, where I feel that having a clearer notion of what migration involves is going to be fruitful in order to discuss in a new way these conceptual and normative issues that are being raised in that area. But generally, I would say that I think that the major contribution of the project is simply to change the conversation. We are in a great need of doing so, being clearer about what we mean when we speak about migration and migrants. And I hope to be able to do this with this project that I'm currently working on.
During your stay at the IEA, you presented papers and gave talks on the magic of law. What is magic in the law?
Yes, so law and magic, these are two notions that I have seen come together, in particular in relation to Scandinavian legal realism, which is an area of legal thinking that I've been interested for a long while. Right? So the Scandinavian legal realists developed this analogy between law and magic, and I think that there is value in exploring this analogy. And one of the reasons why I think so is that legal thinking essentially concerns institutional facts, so facts in which we attribute a function to something that doesn't have this function in virtue of its empirical properties. But these institutional facts allow us to operate in the world, and we do that through the law, right? So in one sense, we could say that the law has this incredible magical ability of instituting, constituting, creating things with which we operate in the world. So one could think of institutional facts along the way in which we could think of a point in a board game. So imagine that there's a rule according to which something counts as a point in a board game under certain conditions. Now, it is obviously not the natural or empirical properties of that object that makes it into a point of this board game, but it's the constitutive rule. And here is where it becomes interesting in showing what are the constitutive rules in the law that allow the flourishment of certain legal statuses, right? So I think of law as a kind of technique, a technology, if you will. In that sense, it's also similar to magic. It's a way through which we operate in the world, right? But of course, it is not real magic. It's a case of illusionism, and we need to understand how the trick is actually done, right? And one way of doing this is illustrating how the constitutive rules come about and discuss them critically in order to assess whether they were made in the proper way we would want them to be made, right? Another thing that associates law with magic has to do with the role of words. Now, we all know about the performative nature of language in magic, but so is the performative nature of the language in the law, right? But there's something special about the language in the law that I want to highlight, and it's the fact that, contrarily to natural languages, the language in the law is it's an administered language. So it's semi-formalized. It occasionally uses terms that we find in natural languages, but it also uses terms of art, right? And these terms of art are a little bit like the formula in magic. So we need to understand that in law, contrarily to natural languages, there's a gatekeeper to legalese. And that places us in a position of power. Because once we can understand that these things are not things that escape our power, but instead that it lies in our hands to make these choices, we are more empowered in order to make wise choices. Well, to put it with Giambattista Vico, homo vocabulum naturae, persona vocabulum juris. So man is a term of nature, person is a term of law, right? And once we understand this distinction between when we use terms to indicate empirical facts and when we use them in order to indicate institutional facts that are found in the law, I think we have much to gain from exploring this gap, and much to gain by exploring the analogy between law and magic, but always under the assumption that it's a matter of tricks.
The theory of migration at the heart of your current project differs from many theories we can find in the social sciences. And you're funding your theory on the institutional facts. Would you explain us the link between the theory of migration and institutional facts?
Yes, so I aim to develop a philosophical theory of migration that is distinct from the way we think of migration in most theories we find in social sciences. And one of the reasons why I want to do that is precisely because I take law to be a key to understand what migration is about. So in that sense, migration for me isn't identical to simple movement across borders. I make a distinction between mobility and migration in that sense. So mobility is the empirical fact of bodies moving in space, whereas migration is pertinent to the legal statuses attributed to individuals who do not have full legal citizenship, right? So in that sense, migration can occur without movement across borders occurring. You could think of other ways in which you can become a migrant. Think of, for instance, a change in your personal status, so marriage, divorce, the birth of a child, adoption, etc. But there's also other ways. So, for instance, a change in the law. Let's say introduction of a new ground for loss of citizenship. Or another way is a change in the legal validity of the territorial scope of application of a jurisdiction. And that is what happened in the case of Brexit. And other ways in which you might have a changed migrational status is by simply letting the time pass. So at the age of 18, after 5 years, after particular cutoff dates, the way time works in combination with the sets of legal statuses allows for persons to become migrants or to cease to be migrants, and it also allows people to fall in and out of irregular presence on a territory. So generally, there is, I think, a confusion concerning also the nomenclature we're using in migration studies. This is in part due to the fact that there's a tendency to avoid terms that are pejorative or that have negative connotations one would want to avoid, for instance. But it seems to be a little bit of a discipline that is becoming lost in translation. And you can see this in the boom we see in use of neologisms, such as M/migrant for somebody who has a lesser access to a granted status of residence, for instance. And the use of these new terms are a sign that there's something that needs to be thought through. So I think that we still find it a little bit difficult when we discuss migration to detach ourselves from the ordinary discourse of media and everyday politics in order to develop well-grounded scientific concepts. And this project is therefore aimed towards going in that direction and hopefully contributing with a new conversation concerning what the nature of this phenomena is.
How has this research helped to advance your understanding of this field of studies? What impact do you hope this work will have on scientific research? and these fields of application?
Current thinking has been very much influenced by this year I've spent as a fellow, a FIAS fellow here at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Paris. And it has so, I think, basically in two different directions. So depth on one hand and breadth on the other hand. So we could say that I've deepened the theory by developing branches of social ontology in which I had not previously gone into, and in particular, relationships between social ontology and theories of the nature of law, such as the artifactual theory of law, for instance, but also the essentialist developments within social ontology that I'm much more aware of now than when I came. On the other hand, I think that I've broadened very much the scope of my reflections, and I've been able to do that because I engaged in conversations with my colleagues here in Paris and in other places in France. And this has led me to be more sensitive, I think, towards the difficulties when it comes to understanding the work done by sociologists, demographers, historians of law, sociologists of law, etc. So I think that both of these elements have been important for me. But mostly, I think that what the year at the Institute really gave me was the ability to marvel at facts, right? To have a sense of wonder. And I think that in philosophy, it is essential that we do not stop wondering about things, right? Then again, you'll tell me that philosophy was born out of a sense of wonder, wasn't it?